Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about AR-9s for SHTF. Doesn't make sense. Is it feasible? Why on earth would you want to do it? Now, when we're talking about AR-9s, I'm going to specifically be talking about the Palmetto PX9. And the reason is because I have a lot of experience on these Palmetto PX9s, AR-9s. I've got four of them that have more than 10,000 rounds on them. Okay, so somewhere between 10 and 15,000 rounds. And this is important because with AR-9s, there's no mil spec. Unlike AR-15s where they're all standardized, AR-9s are not standardized. Okay, so we can't talk about AR-9s in general. We have to talk about AR-9s from a specific company. Okay, so the ones I'm talking about is the Palmetto PX9 AR-9. Okay, so the reason why I love these, or the reason why I first got into these, is because they take Glock mags. Okay, so for the purpose of training people, which is the reason why I originally got into AR-9s, it was really convenient for me to be able to use the same ammunition and the same magazines for both the pistols and the rifles, and it was really convenient to be able to shoot steel targets fairly close. Okay, you can't do that with 5.56. With this, with 9mm AR-9s, you could be shooting them at 10 yards, and as long as you got glasses and eye near protection, you're going to be fine. Okay, so initially I got into AR-9s for the convenience of training. Okay, and then I started seeing some additional benefits. Now, initially, and we're going. This is I started using these probably about 4 years ago, back in 2020. Okay, so initially I was telling people, yeah, we're using AR-9s to train with, but don't buy one of these, right? I was like, yeah, you got it. Your first gun should be an AR-15. Your second gun should be a Glock 17 or a Glock 19. Then get yourself like an everyday carry, like a Glock 43, and then think about getting yourself an AR-9 for cheaper training. Okay, so so that was what I was telling people, and the reason is because that's like, because I don't like making up stuff, right? AR-15s proven, right? Glocks proven. Okay, so I'm not gonna tell people to go buy an AR-9 that's not standardized. Okay, so people started talking to me and asking questions of me, and they're like, well, you're telling me to get this AR-15, but the problem is where I live, I only have access to a pistol range, and they only allow pistol rounds. So if I get an AR-15, I can't train as much. Okay, so I'm like, okay, that's a very valid argument. Okay, and then the other thing I was hearing is, well, AR-15 ammunition is a lot more expensive. Well, back then it was a little bit more expensive. Now it's a lot more expensive. Okay, so now the argument I'm hearing more and more is, I can't afford 5.56, 223. So yeah, I can afford a lot more of 9mm. That's what I can afford to buy. That's where I can afford to train with. So that's also a very convincing argument. Okay, so a combination of training frequency, and being able to buy ammunition both to train with and stockpile. My customers have convinced me that, yeah, you know what, an AR-9 is probably a good choice for you, a good place for you to start. Okay, which is not to say that they should never get an AR-15, but if they're limited by, especially those two factors, if they're limited by, where they can shoot and how much ammunition they can buy, yeah, if in that particular case, an AR-9 might be the better choice. Okay, so now let's say, okay, fine, they get this AR-9. What are they giving up? How's it compared to an AR-15? Okay, so I've got one AR-15 that I completely burnt out the barrel at 22,000 rounds. Okay, I got several others that have fairly high round counts, and I've got four of these AR-9s that I've run up like more than 10,000 rounds. Okay, so now with the AR-15s, we can talk in general, right? That all AR-15s are pretty much, you're gonna break the trigger group something in the trigger group by 8,000 rounds. Okay, so AR-15 trigger groups are rated for 5,000 rounds. You can probably get up to 8,000 rounds. Okay, the same deal with the bolt. You're gonna break something in the bolt, be it a firing pin, an extractor, the gas rings, by 8,000 rounds. Okay, so that's what I have seen in AR-15s. With AR-9s, they have the same trigger group, so you can expect that you're gonna break, because that's a, the AR-9s, the Palmetto AR-9s have a mil spec trigger group. You can expect that you're going to break something in the trigger group by 8,000 rounds. So you got to have spare trigger groups. Now, even though they do, like a mil spec trigger will fit in there, I have found that there can be some reliability issues, and that's it. Palmetto suggests, and I concur through experience, through having gone through several of these triggers, get the trigger groups from Palmetto. The PSA AR-15, AR-10 enhanced polished trigger groups. Okay, I have a bunch of these just because I go through them so frequently. Get these; these will work better. The issue is with AR-9s, because they are because it's a blowback, right? And we're going to talk more about that. When the gun goes bang, there's no rotation to slow down the bolt. So the blowback action is really fast and violent. And what's happening is when that bolt, because remember, when you pull the trigger, the hammer drops. Well, then the bolt starts moving forward, and it's basically slams back, and it puts a lot of stress on the trigger group. Okay, so what I have found that a lot of other mil spec trigger groups, they, for whatever reason, they will mostly work. They'll work like with 99%, let's say, reliability, but occasionally the hammer won't stay back. It'll fall, so there is a failure rate with a lot of trigger groups. Okay, the PSA ones, they work good. Okay, so now the other thing that I do is I put in an 8-ounce buffer weight. Okay, the Palmettos, they come with a 4-ounce buffer weight. I don't know why they don't just ship them with 8-ounce buffer weight, because when you talk to the people at Palmetto, they will tell you, and I've had conversations with tech support and so forth, they will tell you that they put 8-ounce buffer weights in their Palmetto AR-9s. Okay, so that's what they do, because the heavier buffer weight works better. Okay, it slows down that bolt, which is violently coming back. So you definitely want to do that with the Palmetto AR-9. Put an 8-ounce buffer weight, take out the 4-ounce, put an 8-ounce in there. What that will do is, in addition to giving you'll slow down the action, the gun will beat itself up less. Okay, it won't break the firing pin, the hammer pins, because that's one of the issues that I had with these AR-9s. Before I put in the heavier buffer weight, I used to break the hammer pins, right? You can see this one over here. That's an aftermarket one. Since I put in the 8-ounce buffer weight, the firing pins stopped breaking. Okay, so putting in the heavier 8-ounce buffer weight will save your hammer pins from breaking. So again, this is why, this is not a mil spec. This is a Palmetto AR-9. There's no such thing as mil spec. So because I have a lot of experience with these guns, right? Like I said, I got 4 of them with over 10,000 rounds. I'm able to sit here and tell you that, yeah, these guns are reliable. These are the parts that are going to break, okay, as you get into higher and higher round counts. And these are the parts that you have to have replacements for. Okay? So if you've got, aside from Palmetto, right, because there's other companies out there that make AR-9s, if you can reference somebody, right, that says, hey, I've got an AR-9 from this company or that company or that company, and they can tell you, hey, I got 4 of them. They all got like more than 10,000 rounds on it, and this is the list of things that broke. Then you could say, yeah, okay, yeah, so I know what I'm getting into. I know what the limitations are. I know what the replacement parts that I need are, okay? But that's the kind of information that you need if you're going to use a non-mil spec gun, okay, be it whatever it is, for any type of SHTF, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about parts. So like I said, the trigger group likely to break. Something in the trigger group, the firing pins likely to break, especially if you don't get the heavier 8-ounce buffer weight. And that's why I've got like a whole bag full of triggers here. Okay, right? I got a whole bag full of triggers. Okay, so that's the great thing is these are not that much. They're not any more expensive than the standard mil spec triggers. So you might as well buy the ones from Palmetto. They're about the same price. I think somewhere like $60 or something. I don't remember exactly, but get these. Now, what else can break? The other part that usually breaks on AR-15s is something in the bolt. Okay, charging handles do break both on AR-15s and AR-9s, so have yourself some extra charging handles. Here, let me pull out a charging handle. I've done other videos on charging handles. A lot of times they'll crack over here. It doesn't matter if this one's from Tribe. Who is this? No, this one's Prisma. But they'll crack here. Sometimes they'll crack here. Sometimes I've seen roll pins fall out of them, the mil-spec ones. So charging handles are thin. They use a lot. A lot of times you're yanking on these one-handed. These break, regardless of whether you're using an AR-15 or an AR-9, you know, have an extra charging handle, okay? Now, the bolt. One of the great things about the AR-9 is that there's no, you know, well, it's kind of great and not so great. With an AR-15, you've got, the bolt rotates, and that slows down the action, right? You know, basically gives the bolt a chance to get out, slows down the bolt from moving back. The AR-9 is a direct blowback, okay? There's no, it's not a gas operated system. There's no gas that comes up. No gas that comes up through the barrel and pushes the bolt back, okay? So it's just the recoil from the bolt leaving the barrel that pushes the bolt back. Okay? So because there's no rotating bolt, that's a lot less things that can possibly break, okay? There's no gas key here. The purpose of this is basically so that the charging handle has something to grab on, and then you can, you know, basically charge it and get around the chamber, right, and pull back the bolt. So that's why that is there. The thing that I have broken, aside from the trigger thing, you know, some part of the trigger group, either the disconnector that sometimes breaks, or the hammer pins, the firing pin and the firing pin spring. Okay, those two things. There you go. Got a bunch of them here. Okay. There you go. Firing pin and firing pin spring. Now these aren't like AR-15 mil-spec or anything. I mean, AR-15s don't have a spring. So these two things will break. If you're thinking of using an AR-9 for SHTF, have at least two of these: firing pin, spring. Okay, and that's it. I mean, the rest of this, you know, once you pull out the bolt, I mean, the rest of the bolt is just like a chunk of metal. They actually weigh it down here in the back more. An AR-9 is actually heavier than an AR-15 because of the bolt. Because the bolts actually, they weigh it down. They put a weight in there and they hold it in place with a roll pin to try and slow down that action. It's not quite enough, and they give you a 4-ounce buffer weight. Again, use the 8-ounce. But this is a heavy chunk of metal. This is not going to break. The extractor on an AR-15, by the time I get up to about 10,000 rounds, I will usually break the extractor. The extractors do break on these AR-9s, especially if you don't have that 8-ounce buffer weight. But here's the thing: the extractor, basically, the gun will cycle without the extractor. Okay, the recoil itself is enough to actually move the bolt back and move and push the case out. So I've had several situations where the roll pin is usually what breaks. So the roll pin breaks, extractor falls out, gun keeps working, and I don't realize that I've lost the extractor until I go to clean the gun. Okay, or until I go to check the chamber, because, and this is the reason why it's important that you do have an extractor. If you got, let's say, around the chamber, right? Let me put this back in there. I can demonstrate. Okay, so what will happen is, let's say I got around the chamber, right? So I got my magazine in there. I drop my magazine, okay, and I go like this. Normally the extractor will grab the rim of the case and pull it out. Well, if your extractor's if your extractor is broken and you go like this, it's not going to grab it. It's just going to stay in the chamber. Now you can still get it out simply by holding the gun up, and you go like this, and it'll pop out, right? But that's the reason why with 9mm ARs, I always I make sure I look in the chamber in case the extractor broke on me, because the extractor will actually is the thing that's probably going to break first. Usually I'll get less than like 5,000 rounds or less with the extractor, again, just because of the violent blowback. And it takes the standard AR-15 extractor. The roll pin is different though, okay? So the roll pin, so you can get standard AR-15 extractors to put in there, but then you have to know what size roll pin to get. And here, I'll actually wrote it down here. It took me a while to figure this out, but here you go, you guys should be able to see it. So it's a 0.25 by 0.875, or 3/32 by 5/8. Okay, so that's the size of the roll pin, and it took me a lot of searching to figure out what the size of that roll pin is. Because I was just having a hard time figuring it out. Finally, I learned it, and I'm like, I've done a separate video on this so people know what they're looking for. But yeah, you're gonna have to buy that roll pin separate. It doesn't come with it. It's not standard. You can get it on eBay. I've seen them selling it on eBay. You can get a stainless steel one, again, because in fact, I think that the ones I bought now are stainless steel because they're stronger, and as they break, that's what I replaced them with. Okay, so yeah, so those are the things that you have to, that you get. You know, you're gonna break extractors, you're gonna break roll pins. Something in the trigger group is gonna break. Okay, the firing pin and the firing pin spring are gonna break. Okay, so those are the things that you're gonna need. Now, other than that, I mean, they're very solid guns. Okay, the safety works like a standard AR-15 safety. The magazine release is in the same spot over here. The difference is that with AR-15s, the magazine catch is in the back. With this, it's in the front, and that's also the reason why, if you look at the magazine release, it's like this long bar over here, because it needs to go to the front, all the way to the front. Okay. Now, one of the things you gotta be aware of with most AR-9s, especially with these Palmettos, they do not have a last round bolt hold open. Okay. So if I'm shooting a gun, basically, gun goes click. You're not gonna know that the gun's empty until it goes click. Okay. So then what I gotta do is I gotta take out the magazine. I gotta open it up, look in the chamber, make sure there's not a jam there or whatever. Get the next round in there, then charge it again. So it's a two-step process, right? What you don't want to do is the gun goes click, you drop the magazine, put the next one in, because let's say you have a jam, well, now you're just going to make that jam worse. Okay, so with AR-9s, I practice a two-step process, right? Gun goes click, drop the mag, look in the chamber, put the next one in, charge it, safety on. Okay, so that's my standard procedure for you know, doing a magazine change on an AR-9. The sling, I basically strap the same way. I put the magnifier back here. We're going to talk about shooting at distance and accuracy in a minute. Red dot, I like putting the pistol light up here, nice and simple. The optic that I like is the Holosun 510C, especially on a 9mm AR, works great. And with this, I'm able to shoot the steel targets like at 10 yards. I can't do that with 5.56, right? So even me, right? Even with all the AR-15s and stockpiles of 5.56 ammo that I have, I still do like 80% of my training with these 9mm ARs, okay? Because I'm able to shoot the steel targets up close, and you know that has to be an important part of your training, because a lot of confrontations would probably happen at CQB range. Even if you don't want them to happen there, that's where they're going to happen, right? Now let's talk a little bit about accuracy, because accuracy and shooting at distance. Okay, so as far as accuracy, very typical at 100 yards, I'll get like 3 to 4 inches, right? 3 to 4 MOA with 9mm. Okay, and I tried it with a variety of different 9mm. That's generally what I'll get. Okay, with the gun bag, 3 to 4 inches. at 100 yards. I can easily get out to a man-sized target, to those targets over there, to 200 yards. Okay, past 200 yards, it's really difficult. Okay, at three, I've gotten to 300 yards. Like there was one day where I was on 300 yards, there was no wind, and I was hitting it pretty consistently. I went back on another day, 300 yards, and I couldn't even get on the paper, right, because there was some wind blowing, and the bullet had slowed down enough that it was just throwing everything off. Okay, so but at 200 yards, even in windy conditions, I can get 9mm on a man-sized target at 200 yards, especially with the magnifier. Okay, even with AR-15s, most engagements happen at inside of 200 yards. Okay, there's now so the real advantage of the AR-15 is once you get past 200 yards. Okay, because with an AR-15, I can hit really accurate groups, like really nice tight groups, 3 to 4 inch groups at 300 yards. Okay, and then I can get to 400 and 500 yards, just with a red dot and magnifier. And then if you put an LPVO on it, I can go a lot further. Okay, so you gotta know the limitations of your equipment. Okay, everything's got limitations. Right? So like with my AR-10, I know I can get a lot further. So I can't do with an AR-15 as well as what I can do with an AR-10. Okay, so you gotta know what the limitations are of your equipment, and you gotta work within the limitations of your equipment. Now, as far as, let's say, 9mm carbines for SHTF, I mean, they were using 9mm guns during World War II, right? Both the Germans were using them. I mean, the Americans had pistol caliber rifles or carbines. So it's not a new thing. Okay, some guys hated it, some guys loved them, right? So again, all equipment has limitations. You gotta be familiar with the limitations, and you gotta work inside of the limitations of your equipment, right? Whatever it is. Okay? So if you're familiar with that, you can definitely make this work. Now, one of the things I have found with women, okay, women love short barrel guns. The ones that shoot them regularly, okay, because they're less front heavy. Okay, so because they're less front heavy, right, they're able to hold these things up higher. For me personally, I prefer 16-inch barrels. Okay, that's my personal thing. Even in CQB, I prefer 16-inch barrels. But for women, because there's less weight up here, right, they prefer the shorter barrels. The 10 inches seems to be like a perfect length, 10.5 inches. So the great thing about 9mm in 10 inches or even 7.5 inches, you don't get that giant muzzle blast, right? You don't get a fireball, and the gun is not loud. If you got like a 5.56 and you go to 10 inches, it gets a lot louder. If you go to 7.5 inches, it gets way louder. Okay, so for women, especially that like shooting the short barrel guns, 9mm makes a lot of sense, and I've run it through the chronograph, especially with the 7.5. Okay, so a 7.5 inch 5.56 gets about 640 foot-pounds of energy, right? 640. Versus if you go to a 9mm of 7.5 inches, right? That gets somewhere like 400 foot-pounds of energy. Okay, so there's only a like 200 foot-pound gap between 5.56 and 9mm once you get down to 7.5 inches. Okay, so as you go to the shorter barrel, from the testing that I have done on the chronograph, it may actually make sense to go to a 9mm because let's face it, if you got 5.56 in a 7.5 inch barrel that has 640 foot-pounds, yeah, basically you're shooting a pistol like a 10mm. You're shooting a pistol round, right? So it has the energy of a pistol. So I think that at that point, right, if you need to be at 7.5 inches, I think you might as well go to 9mm and avoid the muzzle blast, avoid the excessive noise. Okay, but anyway, that's for you guys to think about. But in general, I have seen that women do very well with shorter barrel 9mm ARs. Okay, first of all, it's quieter. They like it a little bit quieter, less front heavy. They like it less front heavy. It's just a great choice for women. It's not my personal choice. Me personally, I prefer the 16-inch AR-9s. Okay. Now, one of the things that I like doing is I like putting over here. I got an LPVO on an AR-9. Okay, so for shooting like 200 yards, man, I mean, I can get like, if you know your holds, 200 yards is easy. Okay, I mean, I've done plenty of videos where I'm shooting 22 long rifle. Like I'll put a 22 conversion bolt in the 5.56 AR, 200 yards easy, even with a 22 long rifle. Okay, so when you consider that most of your engagements are going to be 200 yards and in, okay, yeah, 9mm AR, not a terrible choice. Okay, the only reason why not use the 22, right? Why not use 22 LR if that can also get on target at 200 yards? The problem I have found is basically reliability. Those 22 cases, they sometimes get bent. They have feeding problems, you know. So, you know, that's not. I haven't seen that problem with the 9mm ARs. You know, it's basically it's a duty round for a pistol, for a duty pistol, right? Like a Glock or a Beretta or a Sig. You know, so when you throw it into an AR-9, it amplifies it. It works even better. Okay, so. Yeah, let's see, anything else I meant to leave off? Oh, magazines. So one of the great things, like I got tons of these ETS magazines that I work with. Usually when I have a feeding problem, something like that, it's usually magazine related. I mean, these magazines have like each of them like literally has thousands of rounds on them. Okay, one of the things that, you know, and they definitely, you know, get weaker over time. So that's something that I've just, you know, it's training thing. You know, it's like, okay, you get a jam, unjam the gun. Okay, that's part of the training exercise. So the springs on this, I can feel it right now, is definitely a little bit weaker compared to the Glock ones. Okay. Now, one of the things to be aware of is that the bolt, as it goes across the top, is very rough on the feed lips. Okay, it does tend to wear them down. So with the plastic magazines, you're gonna see wear on the feed lips as they get worn down over time, right? Because remember, that curve over here is what holds the bullets in. Well, as that gets worn down, the bullets would sometimes nose up. Okay, so I've again, because of the high round counts I've actually thrown out, you know, boxes of these plastic magazines as they get worn down across the top. The Glock magazines, which have the steel lips, I've not had that problem. Okay, so these are a lot more expensive, obviously, but the bolt is, because of the steel lips there, it's not going to wear down the feed lips. So these are definitely more reliable. The 17 round ones are ideal. I have the 32 rounders from Glock. First of all, if you're gonna get 32 round or 31 round magazines, make sure that they are Glock only, okay? Because when you go to some like ETS or some other PMAG or whatever, there's definitely a huge drop in reliability. Even Glock 33 round magazines, there's a drop down in reliability. The 17 round magazines I find are the sweet spot where you get like maximum reliability, even in Glock mags. But even if you're using like cheaper ETS magazines, with up to 17 rounds, you get very decent. If they're new, you'll get very good reliability. If you go just up like from 17 to like 22 rounds, because I have a big drop in reliability. You go to 30, 31 rounds or whatever, gigantic drop in reliability. So 17 rounds is the sweet spot. The other thing is, even if you're using the Glock 33 round magazines, they are a pain in the ass. It is a big pain in the ass to fill up that magazine. It's you know, other than the novelty of having 33 rounds, it's really not worth the effort of fighting to get all those rounds in there. So the 17 rounds really are the sweet spot. Okay, so that's what I recommend you stock up on. You know, get lots of these Glock magazines, but yeah, also get the cheaper PMags and ETS ones. They work very good in these guns. I mean, normally when I train people, I use the ETS ones because I like being able to see what's in the magazines. A lot of times, let's say I'm at a gun range and I'm training a couple of people, I'll tell people put 6 rounds in the magazine. Well, what happens is if I use the Glock magazines, you know, I'll have like 6 people coming up to me asking me how many rounds they put in the magazine. If I give them a clear one, they can see the rounds. So I've learned to, really prefer the clear ones so people can count their own rounds instead of all coming up to me to count their rounds for them. Okay, I mean, yeah, they do have the holes in the back, but when you're training newbies, I mean, because a lot of times the bullets don't line up and you got like to press it down. I just give them clear mags, and it just saves me the headache. Okay. Okay, anything else we can say about these AR-9s? Yeah, for SHTF, as long as you know the limitations, right? Particularly with range, right? Know that 200 yards is your max. Be able to range estimate, whether we're using a circle dot or an LPVO. Being able to range estimate off the size of a man, so that when they're at 200 yards and in, no problem. Okay, you'll definitely be able to work with the guns, and especially if the most important part of training for SHTF is the training part. Okay, it's not the gun part, it's the training part. So if you've got like the best guns and the best ammunition and the best equipment, but you don't train with it, it's not going to be very useful. You're better off with equipment and guns and ammunition that you're going to train and train more frequently, and be better with the stuff, and especially ammunition that you can stockpile. I tell people you gotta have a minimal of 4,000 rounds. Okay, 2,000 rounds for training, 2,000 rounds, in reserve. That's gotta be your minimal. And I tell people, if you don't even think about getting into another caliber or even buying another gun unless you can buy another 4,000 rounds specifically for that gun. Okay, and to me, it's kind of like a commitment to training. Okay, because a lot of times people are like, well, I have a Glock and I'm thinking of getting, let's say, a SIG, or I'm thinking of getting a Beretta. Okay, or I'm thinking of getting this or that, the other thing. And I tell them, okay, if you're gonna buy that gun, and I tell them, listen, I shot the gun, it's a great gun, but if you're gonna buy that gun, make sure that you put in an order for at least 2,000 rounds now, with the goal of buying another 2,000 rounds a month from now. Okay. And they're going to be like, oh, why do I need to buy ammunition? Because that is you proving to yourself that you're actually going to increase your training, okay? Because the goal of buying a second gun is not so that you can train less with the first gun, is so that you can get more training overall, okay? So to me, that's like the test I put out there to people. It's also the test that I do for myself, okay? If I'm going to buy another gun for my personal use, am I, like when I got my AR-10, okay? Boom, I placed my order for my AR-10, right? Immediately, I put in an order for 2,000 rounds, okay? A month later, I had another 2,000 rounds, okay? I had committed to getting that ammunition, immediately at the point that I purchased the gun. And if I can't do it because, let's say, I can't afford it or whatever, then I'm not ready for that gun, okay? So that's part of the test, okay? But yeah, AR-9s, I mean, it's not the way I felt 4 years ago, okay? 4 years ago, I would have said, oh, AR-15, then Glock, and then, if you've got money, then get an AR-9. Now I'm like, yeah, you know what? If you're going to train more with an AR-9 versus an AR-15, if you're going to get more ammunition for this, yeah, get the AR-9, man. It makes a lot more sense. If that's what you can train with, that's what you can get ammunition for, that's the gun that you should get, okay? I think I said everything I wanted to say on this. So anyway, if you guys got any ideas, any additional thoughts, put in the comments. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.